Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining for our Torah class, which we begin a new book, the book of Bamidbar, the fourth book of the Torah. If you are following along in the Blue Oxford Chumash, you can find it on page 726. If you're in any other Chumash, you could easily find it as the fourth book of the Torah. In Hebrew, it's called Bamidbar, in the desert, in the wilderness. In English, it's called the Book of Numbers. So let's start with the English name, which is the Book of Numbers. The reason it's called the Book of Numbers is because it begins with a census, a counting of the Jewish people. Now, we know that the Jewish people were counted multiple times. And Rashi immediately asks, why is God counting the Jewish people again? And our rabbis say that God always counts and recounts the Jewish people because it's an expression of God's love for the Jewish people, because we don't count things that are not important. Nobody counts how many rocks they have in their backyard or how many spoons or forks they have in their house. But you count things that are valuable, things that are precious. You count your money, obviously. So too, the fact that God is always counting us is an expression of God's affection and love for the Jewish people, that he is always counting us over and over again. Having said that about counting, we now come to the opening verses that God instructed Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai. Now, I have to tell you something interesting before we even go further, that this Torah portion is always read on the Shabbat before the holiday of Shavuot. This year, Shavuot will be Sunday night, and we will read it literally a day before, but it's always the Shabbat before Shavuot. And here on the very first verse says that God spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. Sinai, of course, was the mountain that the Torah was given upon. So the very name of the Parsha, which is connected to the wilderness of Sinai, reminds us of the holiday of Shavuot. But the question really is, what's the deeper connection between Bamidbar and the holiday of Shavuot? And the rabbis tell us something very beautiful and very profound. And that is that why did God choose to give us the Torah in the wilderness? Wouldn't it be better if God waited till we got to the land of Israel and give it to us in Jerusalem? After all, Jerusalem is God's city, the holiest city. I want to share three of the many answers that God gives, that the rabbis give, I should say. The first reason why the Torah was given in the wilderness is to tell us something very important, that Torah is accessible to every single Jew, just like the wilderness is accessible to everyone. The wilderness is no man's land or every man's land. There's no signs, do not trespass. It's not the exclusive domain of a select few. Unlike other things that sometimes are, only available to the rich or the powerful or the elite, Torah is the possession, the inheritance of every Jew. As the verse says, Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kilat Yaakov. And there's actually a dimension of Torah that's related to every human being, the Seven Noi Laws. As we know, Ruth is the convert to Judaism. That's why we read the book of Ruth on Shavuos, because she accepted Judaism as we all accepted it at Mount Sinai. The word Ruth, Resh, Vav, Tav, equals 606, because she took upon herself an additional 606 commandments above and beyond the 7 she was already observing as a Noahide, as a descendant of Noah. So the first reason why it's called Bamidbar is that every Jew can come and study Torah. All you need is a desire and a will. And therefore, the Torah is not, it's democratized, so to speak. It's equally, just like a democracy is one man, one vote, everyone has equal rights. So too in the Torah, every Jew has an equal inheritance in the Torah, and every Jew has to be given the opportunity to study Torah, and you never know which Jew is going to be the next great Torah scholar. It's not something that's dependent on your pedigree, on your lineage, on your ancestry. I come from this rabbinic family or this family of scholars. Every Jew could rise to spiritual scholarship, and greatness. So the idea of a midbar is God is saying it's the possession of every single Jew. The second reason why it's given in the desert is because the Torah is the God, the laws of Hashem for the Jewish people, and it's not restricted to one location, because God is the God of the universe. So his laws pertain everywhere, unlike a law of a country that pertains to the people living in that geographical location, but not someone living in a different country. God is God and ruler and creator of the whole world. So wherever a Jew lives, they are bound by these laws. Had the Torah been given in Israel, we may say, well, it's only applicable when Jews are living in Israel. But once they went into exile and they're dispersed in the four corners of the earth, in the diaspora, maybe they don't have to keep the laws. By giving it in the desert, the Torah is saying, even if you live in a desert, even if you live in the most remotely Jewish place, even if you're the only Jew living in your whole city, in your country, you are still bound by these laws. And indeed, it's always been the Torah that has been the unifying force of the Jewish people, because we didn't always have a common land. We didn't always have a common language. We didn't always have a common culture, dress code, society. We went various places, Ashkenazic Jews and Sephardic Jews and Yemenite Jews and all different types of Jews. But what did we have in common? What was the thread that bound us all together? The same laws of the Torah. We were all observing the same commandments, the same holidays, the same rituals. So Torah was given in a desert to teach us that even if you live in a place which is a spiritual desert, there's no Jewish community around you, there's no synagogue perhaps, no whatever, you still have to keep these laws regardless. So that is the second reason why perhaps the Torah was given Bamidbar, which is the prelude to the holiday of Shabbat. And the third reason is a very practical one. If you've ever gone into a desert, and if you've gone to Israel, maybe you've gone into the desert, the Judean desert, Midbar Yehuda. If you've ever gone out there, you realize it's a very peaceful, a very tranquil, a very silent place, very conducive for study, for meditation. What the Torah is saying is, Bamidbar, that if you really want to study Torah, it doesn't mean you have to go live in a desert, but you have to be able to create spaces and times that you block out all the noise. You silence your environment so you could focus and concentrate on the study of Torah. Today, with technology and everything else that goes with it, we are constantly being interrupted. And therefore, we can't study properly. If there's a phone ringing or something beeping or whatever it may be, the idea of Midbar is you have to find quiet spaces to quiet not just the noise around you, but the noise inside of you, and to focus and to concentrate and to meditate and to comprehend fully and deeply the words of the Torah. And the most natural time to do that is Shabbat, because Shabbat we don't engage in physical activity, so we have that island, that oasis of space and time. But every day you could go into a room, turn off the phone, turn off the computer, and just sit and study. It doesn't matter if it's 15 minutes or 30 minutes. The point is the quality of the study should be like a midbar, so you could hear your own inner voice thinking and speaking the words of Torah. So those are some of the reasons why the Torah was given in a desert. Also, I want to point out is Bimidbar, Daled Bet Resh, which is the last letters of Bamidbar, is Daber, word. It also is the same as Davar, which means object. And God created the world through speech. So Davar, objects, things, physical matter was created through God's speech. Now, speech is a metaphor. God doesn't speak. He doesn't have vocal cords. He doesn't have a mouth. He doesn't have a tongue. But just like when I speak, I reveal what's inside of me. But obviously, I'm only revealing a small part of myself through my words. So too, God created this whole universe, which is an outward expression of his essence. It's obviously not his full essence. Just like when I speak, it's just a fraction of my intellect, of my feelings, of my thoughts. so too God created an expression, the whole universe with the planets and the stars and humans and animals, and it's all just like as though it's a verbal expression, because my thoughts are personal. My words is my communication with someone else. So God's communication with us is through the universe, through the world. So davar is an object and daber is speech. And what our rabbis is teaching us is that just as God created the world through speech, every one of us who is in the image of God has the power to create through speech. In our society, we devalue words, unfortunately. Sticks and stones will break my bones, words will never harm me. They teach us that in kindergarten or in pre-1A, and nursery rhymes. And then as we get older, free speech, I could say what I want, and we don't put enough emphasis on words. And in Judaism, there's tremendous emphasis on proper speech, positive speech, not using any negative speech, not speaking gossip or slander. And we're very much aware and responsible for what we say and to use the gift of speech properly, because just as God created worlds through speech, so too man can create worlds through speech. I see a question here, and the question was, is this the reference of listening to the kol dama daka, that God is not in the mountain, in the storm, in the earthquake, and the lightning, and the thunder, but in the small, still voice? Yes, God speaks to us and through us, and we have to be able to tune into that frequency. Just like when you're listening to the radio, sometimes you have to turn the dial to pick up the frequency. Sometimes you have to turn your internal dial to pick up to your own internal frequency, which is the voice of Hashem speaking to you. I'll tell you a story I just heard. I was listening to a class this morning on my phone, and as I was driving, and there was a rabbi, I think his name was Rabbi Trenk. He was known as a master educator. They tell a story that there was some yeshiva boys who were up in a campsite. I didn't get the details, but the gist of it was that they were getting together and they needed another staff member to come to this retreat or something, and they called a student to come up, and it was a couple of hour drive. He was like a teenager, older than a teenager, and he said, I'll come up, but do me a favor. I'm not going to get there till 9, 10 o'clock. Could you make sure that 9 people don't daven the evening service, because I'll be driving, I won't be able to pray with a minyan, with a quorum. If 9 people could hold back from praying, so when I get there, we could make a minyan. And they said, sure, we'll do that for you, even though the regular evening services were 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. We'll wait till you get here. When he arrived, the boy walked in and he said, Myra, like, it's time to pray the evening service. And the rabbi who was overseeing the camp said to the student, Myra, wow, what a love for prayer that you insisted that they wait for you, because you didn't want to pray without a minyan. You wanted to make sure you had a quorum. And the rabbi was beaming at the student, Myra. And the student said that whenever he would see this rabbi for years, when he would run into him in the street, in the synagogue, he would look at him and say, Myra. He remembered him for wanting to pray Myra. And he would always beam at him like, wow, I remember how you loved to pray Ma'ariv properly with a minyan. And he would always like compliment him by saying, Myra, like, I remember that. Like, wow, that was your greatness. And the student said that now it's 30 years later, I'm a businessman and I travel around a lot for business. But one of the things I always do is, no matter where I'm going, no matter how late I arrive in a town, I always go find a minyan to daven Ma'ariv. And even if I'm tired and I want to just go to sleep and pray on my own in my hotel room, I go find a minyan. You know why? Because I still remember my rabbi saying, Ma'ariv, how he was complimenting me for my love of prayer, that I insisted on praying with a minyan. So words can create a new reality. The proper words, just like words can destroy a person, God forbid, we all talk about verbal abuse. Verbal abuse could destroy a person's inner world and really cripple a person and make a person permanently emotionally handicapped unless they work through the challenge, right? Well, what would be the opposite of verbal abuse? If someone has an idea, I'd like to coin a phrase, the opposite of verbal abuse. Instead of using words to abuse somebody, which this is destructive, we have to use our words to create someone's character, create somebody's, draw out their goodness, their kindness, their love. Because when you speak positive words to somebody, you encourage them or you compliment them sincerely. It's like holding up a mirror to them and showing them their own inner self. And when you see yourself in a positive light, you want to strive to live up to that. And indeed, when you look back at the creation of the world, God didn't just create the world through speech, but every day, you know what he did? Illuminate them, okay? Verbal illumination. So it's not enough to not abuse people verbally. That's step one. Step two is to invigorate them with your words. And if you look at the creation of the world in the 6 days of creation, God says, let there be light. And there is light. Let there be dry land is dry land. Let there be vegetation is vegetation. Every day God says. But then the end of each day it says, and God observed everything that he did, and behold, it was good. Which means God affirms every day of creation by saying it's good. And when you think about that, the message is it's not enough to create something. You have to sustain it. And you sustain it with positivity, with words of affirmation and approval and gratitude. So that is what God did every day of creation. So if God does that, surely we have to do the same. And that applies not only to children. People think, oh, with children, you have to speak positively to them and encourage them to grow through positivity and to notice the good they do, not the bad they do. But we really are all children at heart. And it's the same thing with adults. If we only criticize and point out people's mistakes, they will not grow, they will not change. The only way people really change is when you show them their potential. So Bamidbar, the desert, has many, many meanings, and especially as we approach the holiday of Shavuot. And if you think about the power of words, there's no greater example than the Ten Commandments, because God spoke to us these words. And these words literally has kept us as a nation. And by the way, this year, this Sunday night will be the 3,333rd anniversary of the giving of the Torah. Quite remarkable that we have remained a nation, despite being less than 1/4 of the world, 0.2 of the population. We have remained a loyal, steadfast, distinct, connected nation, following Hashem's Torah for 3,033 centuries. And what was it? It wasn't that we had an army or we had a country necessarily throughout those years. We had the words of Hashem. And just like God is indestructible, his words are indestructible. And therefore, as God is eternal, his words are eternal. And therefore, his words have made us into an eternal nation. So whatever happens to the Jewish people, as long as we have the Torah and we keep the Torah, and we follow the Torah, we will always remain a Jewish nation. And as history has shown, no nation, no power, no force in the world can destroy the relationship between God and the Jewish people, which was built on Bamidbar. The words, Dibur, the words that God communicated to us in a desert, and specifically in a desert. But now let's go not from the word Bamidbar, which is the Hebrew name, but let's talk about the English name, which is the book of Numbers. It begins with the census of the Jewish people. Now we all know what a census is. In America, we have censuses too. But listen to the way the census happens in the Jewish people. God tells Moshe, and this is verse 2, Si'u, raise up at Rosh the heads of Kol Adat Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, according to their families, to their father's house. Now, the first question is, there are many words in Hebrew for counting. Like right now, we're during the days of Sfirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer. Lispor is the count. Limnot is the count. There are many words for counting in Hebrew. Yet it doesn't say you shall count by saying you should tispor or timneh. It says raise up the heads. Well, why is that the command to count? What does raising up the heads have to do with counting? But then it goes on to say, that actually doesn't say it here. It says it in the next Torah portion when there's another counting of the tribe of Levi, and then there are other counts. As I told you, there are multiple counts of the Jewish people. In not in this verse, but in other verses, it says when you count the Jewish people, each one should give a half of shekel, which is going back to the portion in the book of Exodus of Kitisa, and you count the heads of the Jewish people through the contributions. So the way Jews were counted was everyone had to make a contribution, implying that you are not just counted by existing. You know, what's the difference between existing and living? Okay, you ever hear the expression, someone says, go get a life? What does it mean, go get a life? I'm alive. The answer is you could be alive and exist, but existence is that you take up space. Living is what you do with your existence, what you contribute through your existence. That's living. So when you say somebody is full of life, what you're saying is they're full of life. They're full of doing and contributing. They're not just sitting on a couch and existing. So your existence is your being, and your living is what you do with your being. And by the way, not just humans have existence and living, everything in this world. So a tree exists, but the life of the tree is to bear fruit. Water exists, but it has life when it waters something or quenches a thirst. Everything has its existence and its purpose. The purpose for which you exist is your life, is how you live. So the Torah says when you count the Jewish people, if you want to know how many Jews exist, you could just count 1, 2, whatever. But if you want to know, if you want to teach them that existing is living, then they have to make a contribution. I just want to tell you something very interesting. We're talking about the Jewish nation. The Jewish people never had much of an existence, but we had a very long life. What does that mean? What that means is that sometimes, let's say 2 people, you get married, right? And then you have children. So before you got married, you had your whole house to yourself. All the rooms were yours. There was no noise in the room. It was very quiet. I remember once talking to a guy. He said, I don't want to get married. I said, why not? He says, Rabbi, I'll never forget this. He says, do you know the beauty of leaving your house in the morning and coming home and finding everything in the exact same place you left it? That was his idea of a good life. The point is that when you invite someone into your life, whether it's a spouse or you have children, or you invite a guest into your house, now your existence is compromised. Why is it compromised? Because you have to share the space, you have to share the food, you have to share everything, right? Hey, you want the temperature higher, your wife wants it lower, whatever it is. You're giving up some of your freedom of existence. So why do you do it? You do it because to live alone is not a life. Not to say that you can't have a meaningful life, but the point is we all want to have relationships, loving relationships. So when we give of our existence to others, give charity or whatever, we may be giving up some of our existence. I'm giving away half of my meal. I have less to eat, less to exist on, but I have more of a life, of a purpose. And we choose life over existence. So the way the Jews are counted is by giving a half a shekel. But when you go back to Kisisa, it says, but make sure that you should count them properly, and there should not be a plague. Below Yebem Negef is what it says when you count them. So why does it say raise up the heads? Just like it says in Kitisa, raise up the heads. And why does it say, and there shouldn't be a plague? Why would there be a plague? God forbid a catastrophe, because the Jews aren't counted properly. And here we have a very interesting idea that is very, very relevant again to the times that we live in. We all know what the great sage Hillel said in Ethics of Our Fathers. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if I'm only for myself, what am I? Meaning to say that it's not enough to only be self-consumed. You have to have a purpose beyond yourself. That's what we were talking about before, existence versus living. Existence is your existence. Living is what you're living for, what your purpose is. And the real happiness and meaning and fulfillment in life comes not through your existence. The Jewish people had a very meager existence. Most of our history, we barely had food to survive on. We were being persecuted, being oppressed. We didn't have a homeland. We were thrown into little ghettos. But look how rich our life has been. Look at the contributions we've made. Look at the impact we've had on every civilization, physically and spiritually. So your existence could be very small, but your life could be very large. On the other hand, your existence could be very large, but your life can be very small. So your life is not and that's why a lot of people make a mistake when they talk about happiness. They focus on their existence. How big of a house do I have? How big is my car? How big is my vacation, right? But real happiness is not about existence. It's about living. It's how much of a purpose and a meaning do I have? Do I have a reason every day to get out of bed with enthusiasm and excitement to do something meaningful? So when we look for happiness in life, we shouldn't look in the realm of existence. We need to exist. We need food, we need shelter, we need the basic necessities. But the larger your existence doesn't mean the larger your happiness or your life. You could live in a 20-bedroom house, a mansion, and you could have no life. And you could live in a tiny little apartment and you could have a very big life. So life and existence is two separate things. That's why the Jews have to be counted through the giving of the shekel, right? So now we come to why it says raise up the heads of the Jewish people. Excuse me. So the answer is that counting people is as we say, a double-edged sword. Why? Because on the one hand, counting represents the individual. Each individual is counted. On the other hand, the danger of counting is that the reason you usually count is to know what the total is. So I count my money to know how much money do I have in total. I count how many people there are to know how many people there are in total. So when you look at the totality, the collective number, you may forget about the individual. So a lot of times statistics, right? You know, the joke, the guy comes to the doctor, he says he needs a surgery, and he says to the doctor, what is the success rate of this surgery? And the doctor says, well, 9 out of 10 people survive this surgery. And you're the 10th surgery I'm doing this week, right? For you, if you're that 10th person, it doesn't matter that 9 out of 10 survive the surgery. Statistics are very nice, but there's also the individual, and we always have to remember about the individual. So the Torah says the way to count is to raise up the heads of the Jewish people, which means, yes, we need to know the census, but we should never do that at the expense of the individual. We should realize that while we're counting, it's out of love that each person matters, each person counts, and every member of the community is vital and essential and critical to the mass. It doesn't matter if it's rich or poor, wise or not so bright, whatever category, the weak, the vulnerable, the powerful, everyone, men, women, children, widows, orphans, every member is an essential member of the community, and we should never overlook anyone. And that's why the Torah is teaching us that counting has this danger, that it could lead to negative ramifications if we forget about the individual, if we just look at the masses. Yes, we have to think about the masses. We have to think about each particular individual. We know Moses was chosen to be the leader of the Jewish people because God saw when he shepherded the flock of his father-in-law. He ran after one little sheep that went astray to bring it back to the flock and to water it. That's the greatness of a good leader, that he thinks about the welfare of the entire community, but at the same time of each individual in particular. And there are two words. There's individuality, and then there's individualism. Individuality is a positive thing. There's individuality. The Talmud says, a rabbi say, that just like no two people have the same face, no two people have the same perspective, mindset. Just like you have a fingerprint that's yours and no one else's in the world, amazingly God made it that way, you have a soul print that's your particular soul print. That's why the Talmud says God made man singular, while everything else he made in numbers, many trees, many fish, many animals. He made one human being, Adam, to say every person is an individual. And just like when Adam was created, the whole world was dependent on him and his actions, so too, even though we share this planet with 7 billion people, we should realize we're an individual and the whole world could be impacted by me, by you, by every one of us individually. As the Talmud says, every person has to say the whole world was created for me, meaning the challenges of the world are mine. I can't just say others will deal with it and so on and so forth. So individuality is a good thing. You should know you're unique, you're special, you're custom made. God doesn't do mass production. He makes each person unique, custom made, special. On the other hand, individualism, which is the philosophy of each man for their own, that's negative. That's not a Jewish perspective. We have to realize we're part of a greater whole. We're individuals, but at the same time, we're a cohesive collective group, because the power and the strength of the group is much greater than the parts. The sum total is greater than the parts. So if we just focus on our individuality and go our own way, we forget about others. Rabbi David Aaron from Jerusalem, and we pray for the welfare of Jerusalem. Our Torah study today should be in the merit of our brothers and sisters in Jerusalem who are under tremendous fire and attack right now. But there's a great rabbi there. He's spoken at the shul. His name is Rabbi David Aaron. And he tells a story that when he started learning Kabbalah, he heard about this rabbi who teaches mysticism, Kabbalah. So he went to see the class. He walks in, the rabbi calls him up. He's like, oh my gosh, he's picking on me now. And he walks up in front of all the students, and the rabbi takes out an apple and puts it out. So Rabbi Aaron takes the apple. Or he stretches out his hand to take the apple. The rabbi pulls back his hand. Then again, he puts it out. Aaron tries to take it, Rabbi Aaron. Again, he pulls back. Finally, he doesn't know what he's doing wrong. And the students show him like this, open your hand. So he opens his hand, and the rabbi put the apple in his hand. The rabbi said, this is lesson number 1 about Kabbalah. The word Kabbalah means receptivity, l'kabel, to receive. The whole message of Kabbalah is that God is showering us with his light, with his infinity, and we have to try to receive that. He said, what's the difference between taking and receiving? People usually use terms like, we got to get the most out of life. Or if you go into a restaurant or people order, they say, I'll take this, or I'll have that. We focus on our taking and getting. But when you take, then you own it, but you're alone. You took it. It's all about you. When you receive, you're acknowledging that I am being receptive. Someone else is the giver, giving to me. Now, when I take, I only think about myself, and I don't feel any love in what I got. It's just that I took it. But when I receive it, I say, well, who gave it to me? Who gave me? So take a common expression. Take another breath, or take your next breath, or take a deep breath. You could either say take a deep breath, or you could say receive a deep breath. And it's a big difference. It may sound like semantics, but it's a big difference. Take a deep breath is you took it. I possess it. No. You didn't create that breath of air. God created it. When you take it, a lot of meditations about breathing techniques, but you have to know how to breathe. I'm receiving, and as I feel the air coming into my lungs and I'm breathing and I'm alive, I feel God's love, that God is filling up my lungs with the air. So I'm receiving, and that's what Kabbalah is all about. So the word receiving implies there's a relationship. I didn't just go and take it. Like if there's something on my desk and I pick it up, like the shofar here that's on my desk, I took it. But when I put out my hand, someone gave it to me. So when I receive, it means that I am in a loving relationship. And life is all about relationships. So yes, individuality, you're an individual, but not individualism, because there's no such thing as individualism, because you cannot be in this world by yourself. You rely on so many other people and God, of course, for your existence. So you're constantly receiving. You're receiving sunlight, you're receiving water, you're receiving air, you're receiving everything you need. You're receiving Torah, spiritual sustenance from God. Everything you survive on is And then there are so many things that others do for you or provide for you. You have electricity in your room right now, a light. Well, who invented that? Who installed the light fixture, right? You go to, the list is on and on. And by thinking in the terms of receiving versus taking, you're always aware of the relationships you're in and your dependence on others, which doesn't make you smaller, it makes you bigger, it makes you happier, because you realize how much people are doing for you on a constant basis. So yes, we have to count, because we have to realize we're part of a larger whole, and we have to always think, as Hillel says, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? That's individuality. But when I am only for myself, what am I? That's why individualism is bad, because you can't only be for yourself. And, in today's day and age, I think with technology and, the way the world is structured today, more and more people do their own thing, so to speak, we just don't connect as much with others. Like how many people, I was walking down the block with my wife the other day, and we're thinking about the fact that we, on our block, maybe there's 20 families or couples or whatever living on the houses on the block. We know maybe 2 or 3 of them. The other 17 we don't know. And my wife and I was saying, maybe we should have a block party one day where everyone gets together and just get to know your neighbors that live on your block. Everyone lives in their own world today, and we don't connect as much and appreciate our relationships with one another. So yes to individuality, no to individualism. Now we come to a little bit of a painful subject, which is when you say in the desert, it doesn't bring up the best memories, because the story of the Jews in the desert is a very sad story. Jews left Egypt. There was all this excitement. They're going to Israel. They're going to settle the land that God promised to our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's wonderful. But it ended up being a long journey of 40 years with the original departees never reaching their destination. So imagine, the buses are loaded, the planes are loaded. There's an itinerary. We're going to a country. We're going somewhere. And everyone who took off never arrived, okay? Why? We all know what happened. Grumbling, the Jews were always ungrateful, unhappy, complaining, dissatisfied, rebellion against Moses, against Aaron, quarrels, rifts. The list goes on and on. A golden calf, 40 days after the Torah was given. We're coming to Shavuos. We got the Torah, but we don't really talk about what happened 40 days after. We worshiped the golden calf, and Moses smashed those tablets that were given on Shavuot. It's only Yom Kippur that we celebrate the anniversary of the second tablets, the day of forgiveness. So everything goes wrong. Supposed to get the Torah, ends up being smashed, the tablets. Supposed to go to Israel, never arrive. Only the children get to Israel, because that generation wasn't ready to conquer the land, because the spies come back with a negative report. We're intimidated. The people there are too mighty. We felt like grasshoppers in their eyes. God provides miracles, manna from heaven, and Jews complain about that too. They don't like the food. God provides them great leaders like Moses and Aaron. They rebel against their leaders, and Korach and his people have to be swallowed up. It's like a litany of mishaps and crises, and it's very disheartening, because this was the generation that witnessed the exodus from Egypt, the 10 plagues, splitting of the sea, and yet the story in the desert is not a very happy story. But obviously the lessons remain for each and every one of us. And the first lesson is that there were good things that happened in the desert, like the Torah was given in the desert. And we live by that Torah till this very day. But it also teaches us something else. And this is very practical and relevant to all of our lives. There is freedom from and freedom to. So the Jews leave Egypt, they want freedom from Egyptian slavery and persecution. And that went well. The Jews left Egypt, they fled, They took the dough on their back, didn't even have time to bake it. They had faith in God, and they left with the dough on their back. And hence the holiday of Passover, we celebrate the Exodus from Egypt. And human nature is that we all know the idea of flight or fight, right? When we face a danger in our lives, we automatically either go into a sense of fight or flight. But then when we overcome that danger, like the Jews who got out of Egypt, okay, they're out, they're safe, they're in the desert. Now, what's your vision? What's your goal? What's your destination? Are you willing to show the same courage that you showed to leave the danger of Egypt in order to show the same courage and faith to arrive at your goal, at your destination? And unfortunately, what we see in this story and the lesson we have to learn is that the second half of the journey, you would think the second half would be easier because you left Egypt, you're out of prison, you're out of jail, you're out of slavery, you're out of persecution. Now you just have to arrive in the promised land. But sadly, and this is human nature, that when it comes to leaving, there's this fight or flight mentality. But when it comes to arriving, many of us sadly don't have that same devotion, focus, vision, goal orientation. And there are many examples that we could use in history, but also in our personal lives. And, you know, yesterday was Yom Yerushalayim, the day we celebrated the return to Jerusalem in 1967. When you think about 1948, 3 years after the Holocaust, brave Jews went, resettled the land, fought the wars, conquered the land. 1967, Six-Day War, exceeded all, you know, it was a surprise attack, but yet we went and, you know, conquered the Judean and Samaria and Jerusalem that we prayed for 1900 years. When you think about a lot of the great achievements in Jewish history, you think, well, Jews had the courage to leave the concentration camps in Europe and come and resettle the land of Israel and fight the wars, right? At the same time today, literally today, Israel is being shelled with fire, with attacks, with missiles. And you say, well, what happened? You know, where is that same determination that we saw in the past? And I'm not, God forbid, standing here in Palm Beach judging Israel. Far be it for me to do that. But unfortunately, all of us in our lives, sometimes in that moment of danger, we have supernatural strength. But once things become okay and we're out of the threat of the past danger, we sort of become a little bit, I don't know if the word is lazy, or become a little bit complacent, a little bit, you know, we don't have that same vision that we had in the beginning. And sometimes it's a crisis and a danger that awakens the passion and the determination in us, as we see, like today, Jews around the world are on edge. What can we do? How are we going to help our brothers and sisters in Israel? But when things are going well, we forget about it, and we don't have the focus of where we're heading. And, you know, on a daily basis, what we could all do is have clear visions and goals. Now, some people have goals for their life. You know, what's my 5-year plan? What's my 10-year plan? Where do I want to be at this and this point? In other words, do you know where you're heading, or you're just letting the days come by, roll in and roll out, and whatever life brings? Or do you have a clear path? This is where I want to go in my life. This is what I want to achieve. Because if you don't know where you're going, you know, I always use the example of Waze or GPS, right? If you want to get somewhere, the first thing you got to do is enter your destination into the GPS. If you don't tell the GPS where you want to go, you stand no chance of getting there, right? So whether it's on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis or an annual basis, it's good to have a vision. What do I want to achieve? You know, there are Jews who learn a page of Talmud a day. It's called Daf Yomi. And in 7 years, you finish the whole cycle of the Talmud. Every day they live with a vision. I want to finish the Talmud. It's going to take me 7 years, right? But also, like, what's my life plan? What's my life goal? What's my ultimate destination? Where do I want to arrive? The desert is a story of Jews who departed but never arrived. Now, arrival doesn't just mean that you lived your life and you died. It means that you arrived to where you wanted to arrive. Where do you want to be? Where do you want your family to be? And it's as simple as having basic goals and principles for living. What do I want out of every day? It's something we could all do. You make a list of, on a daily basis, what do I want to achieve? What does a good day look like for me? How do I know at the end of the day if I had a good day or not? Did I meet certain criteria for a good day? Is a day that you pray, that you study Torah, that you performed an act of generosity for a stranger? Like, what is the definition of I've arrived, I've achieved my goal for the day? Or where do you want to be in a year from now? Like, living with goals and a clear destination, so we don't just react. See, most of us are reactive, not as proactive. And it's much more difficult to be proactive than to be reactive. When something goes wrong, we right away respond. But if everything's going okay, we become complacent. So the idea of the Midbar is, yes, there were a lot of challenges for the Jews, but maybe because after hundreds of years of slavery, see, a slave doesn't have any ambition. He doesn't have any goals because he's a slave. He just goes through his days, eats, drinks, works, and that's it. He can't have a dream that this is where I want to go with my life, right? And when they went into the desert with that slave mentality, they forgot how to dream. And even though God gave them a dream, you're going to go to the promised land, the land of Israel, they didn't know how to dream. But as free people, we always have to live with ambition, with passion, with a dream. You always have to dream. Herzl said, if you dream it, it's not, if you will it, it's not a dream. In other words, dream and willpower go hand in hand. The greater your dream, the greater your willpower to achieve it. So if someone were to stop you on any given day and say, what's your dream for your life? Do you have a dream? Or are you just managing your life day to day? A Jew always has to live with a dream. Now, our collective dream is that Mashiach should come, the Messiah should come, and redeem the whole world from war and bloodshed and violence and jealousy and competition and strife and all the goodness that we pray for the end of days. That's our collective dream. But what's our dreams as individuals? What do we want to achieve so that, when people are on their deathbed or the final stages of their life, there was a woman, Bonnie, I think her name was Bonnie Weir. She was an Australian palliative care nurse, and she wrote a book about the 5 regrets of the dying, where she interviewed hundreds of people in hospice and before they died and said, what are your regrets? And they told her what the 5 regrets were. I think the number 1 regret was that they didn't follow their own dreams. They let others shape their course of their life for them to live up to the expectations of others. Regret number 2, that they didn't, they spent too much time working, not enough time with family and friends. And you can look it up. It's very famous. Her book became a bestseller. But most of the things that people regretted was not that they didn't drive a nicer car or live in a nicer house or take more vacations. It was about living with a dream in their life and living their dream and their vision. And obviously the dreams of the Jewish people are intertwined with the dreams of the Torah and the dreams of Judaism. But what is your dream? And make sure that you don't get lost in the desert for 40 years and never arrive where you need to get to. Finally, excuse me. When you look at the story of the book of Bamidbar, yes, there are a lot of challenges and struggles, but some of the commentaries point out, and Moses almost loses it, later on in the subsequent Torah portions, Moses is going to cry to God and say, God, why did you put me in this predicament? Did I give birth to this nation? I have to carry them in my bosom, and so on and so forth. So it was a very, very challenging time. And the rebellion of Korach and on and on. Miriam is quarantined because she speaks bad, complains about her own brother. So a lot of strife even within the family of Moses and so on and so forth. But why do we have a whole book about the desert? And at the very end of the book of Bamidbar, which is going to be, 2-3 months from now, the Torah is going to recount all the journeys of the Jews in the desert. And there was a total of 42 journeys. 42 locations that they stopped over the course of 40 years. On an average, every year they were moving to a different location. And some of the rabbis and the commentators explain it very simply, that the Torah doesn't want us to be too critical of that generation. Most of us, we may move once or twice in our lifetime, relocate from here to there, but pretty much, we live our lives in 2 locations or in 3 locations, and hopefully that's 80, 90, 100 years. Imagine living for 40 years, and every year you have to pack up and move to a new location. We all know that when people go on trips, they get a little grumpy, a little weary. Travel does that. And you're not as calm, you're not as relaxed, you're not as tranquil and peaceful. And sometimes it can bring out the worst in people. So while, yes, we have to learn from what happened in the desert, all the problems that the Jews encountered and created through their actions, at the same time, let's keep it in context. They didn't have an easy journey. 40 years traveling, besides the fact that they're coming from a slave experience mentality, they're also always moving from one place to the next without any real stability, never knowing when they're going, when they're coming. And so the book of Bamidbar that we're just starting now will conclude with a recap of all the journeys of the Jewish people to help us appreciate how difficult it was. We know about immigrants, right? We talk about our ancestors, grandparents who had to relocate from one country to another and start life again, and what that entails. And we have tremendous admiration for them for picking up their lives and starting all over again. Well, imagine doing that 40 times from one place to the next. So therefore, we should not jump, so to speak, to criticize them, but yet at the same time learn from the mistakes that happened to the Jewish people in the desert. One last thought on this week's Torah portion is that originally the firstborn of every family was intended to serve in the temple. And in this Torah portion, we're going to have about the Levites, who were the ones who served in the temple. But originally, it was supposed to be the first member of each family. But because they worshiped the golden calf, God substituted the firstborn for the Levites in their place. And therefore, when we look at the role of a Levite, what is a Levite? A Levite includes the Kohens and the Levites. They are individuals who devoted their life to a higher calling, to serving God and serving the Jewish people. And Maimonides says something very beautiful. He says that, yes, there are people who are biological Levites, meaning just like you could be a Jew by birth or a Jew by choice. Basically, Maimonides says you could be a Levite or a Kohen by birth or by choice. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that if you choose to become a Kohen, you are actually a Kohen. No, it goes based on your lineage. If you are not a descendant of Aaron, you cannot become a Kohen or a Levite of the family of Levites, which is Moses' family. However, Maimonides says that by God taking the servitude in the temple from the Kohens and giving it to the Levites, there's a message. And the message is that even if you weren't born into it, you could choose it. Which means every person who says, I want to devote my life to a higher calling, to serve God, to serve the Jewish people in a leadership role, just like Levites, you take on some communal responsibility, endeavor, you become a servant, because that's what a Levite and a Kohen is, a servant of God, a servant of the people. You become like an honorary Kohen, an honorary Levite. You attain that spiritual status, that it's accessible and available to every single person. Every single Jew can choose that role and that responsibility and take it upon themselves. And that's a great deal of this week's Torah portion. And while the rest of the Jewish people were counted from the age of 20, the Levites were counted from the age of 30 days old, because to train a child and raise a child in that role and responsibility, the training has to begin from the earliest age possible, even as young as 30 days old. And so as we read the portion of Bamidbar this week and read it as a prelude to the giving of the Torah, we should remember all the lessons. And just to recap some of them, first of all, Torah is a path, a roadmap, a book, a divine document that gives us a vision for our lives. So we live with purpose and meaning, and we have a goal in mind. Second of all, the idea that wherever you are, you must follow the Torah. And that's the beauty of the Torah. The beauty of the Torah is that you could be in the most remote place in the world. You could be on a vacation in the most distant space. But, when Friday night comes, it comes to every Jew wherever they are, equally. When the sun sets on Friday night, Shabbos comes to you as a Jew, no matter what. Whether or not you receive the Shabbos or not, that's your choice. But Shabbos arrives. And you could be in an airport in the most remote city in the world, and there's lots of food for sale in the airport, but you're kosher, so you don't eat any of that food. Or you find something that's kosher, like a fruit or a vegetable or water. The idea that you're bound by this Torah everywhere, because there's no such thing as outside of the governance of God. You're always under God's protection and God's rule, and you act that way no matter where you are. And finally, in a day and an age where we're constantly bombarded with messages from without, distractions, noises, so many things pulling at our attention, social media and advertising and television and computers, and things are beeping all over the place, and there's so much commotion, so much noise. Be able to find some solitude, some quiet spaces, some quiet times to just study Torah. And I'll just conclude that I had a grandfather, blessed memory, my father's father. His name was Yosef Scheiner. My son, Yosef, is named after him. And when I was learning for my bar mitzvah, we lived in Borough Park. He lived in Crown Heights, which is like 20 minutes away. So one day a week, I would take the bus and go to Crown Heights, and he would learn with me for my bar mitzvah, and I would sleep in his house and go back to school the next day with my friends who lived in Crown Heights. And I used to, sleep in his house, and, it wasn't like today, each bedroom has a private bathroom. There was one bathroom down the hall. So I remember once, like, must have been 5 o'clock in the morning, it was pitch dark outside, and I had to use the restroom. And I got out of my bed, and I walked down the hallway to get to the bathroom, and I passed the living room, and I looked in, and there was my grandfather, like 5 a.m. with a big volume of Talmud, sitting in the living room with a cup of coffee and studying, 5 a.m. And I remember going to my father and saying, I saw Zaidi learning 5 o'clock early. It was pitch dark outside. I was only 13, 12 years old. He said, yeah, every morning Zaidi gets up like 5 a.m. or whatever time. And before he goes to the morning services, he studies for a few hours because he loves the quiet. The house is quiet, the street is quiet, and he could really focus. His mind is fresh. He just woke up. And that was his daily routine. And whether it's getting up early in the morning or whatever time you can find, to just be in solitude, to study, just like the Jews in the desert. It says when God gave the Torah at Mount Sinai, a bird didn't chirp and a cow didn't moo. The whole world was in silence. And why did God do that? Perform that miracle? First of all, to show that God's word penetrated the whole world. Every level of the world. Every level meaning from human down to inanimate objects and animals and plants, but also to show us that to truly absorb Torah, we have a word today which is seen as a good thing, and I guess in some contexts this is good. It's called multitasking, doing multiple things at the same time. And while your hands could maybe do 2 things at the same time, I could be talking on the phone and writing a note or typing an email at the same time, the brain doesn't work that way. If you're focused on one thing, you can't multitask with your brain and think about 2 things simultaneously. It's impossible. You can think about contradictions, but you can't think along 2 tracks. And furthermore, you can't speak without concentration. Now, if you know something memorized, like prayers, your mouth could just rattle it off because you're not thinking about it, because your tongue is trained to say these words. Well, if you know a Pledge of Allegiance by heart, you could just say a Pledge of Allegiance to, you could say it by heart and you could be thinking about something else. But if you're really thinking about something if you're speaking words that are new words, new ideas, your mind has to be present. And so you can't really do multiple things at the same time. And that's the idea of Bamidbar, to be in a quiet space to be able to absorb the Torah. So I wish everyone a beautiful day, a good week, and we have big plans here for Shavuot. I hope you'll take advantage of it. We have Sunday night a big opening Shavuot dinner, followed by a great scholars, and we'll have a wonderful Shavuot together. And very exciting year because it's the 3,333rd anniversary. So I look forward. I see a question that I didn't answer, and that is, do converts get to choose their house, or are they assigned? When you say your house, if you're talking about Kohen, Levite, in Yisrael, the answer is a convert is an Israelite. 90% of Jews are Israelites. Only those who are direct descendants of Aaron or Moses are Kohens and Levites. So have a wonderful day. Great seeing everyone, and happy good Shabbos and Chag Sameach if I don't see you before the holiday. There are Zooms tomorrow night. My wife Dini is giving a special Zoom for women about the holiday of Shavuot. I would encourage you to listen to that and watch that. And Thursday night, believe it or not, we have a doctor's professor, psychologist, also like a scholar of Torah, who's going to talk about the Torah and psychological perspectives on reemerging into society, showing resilience in these days of hopefully the COVID waning and reemerging into normal life. So wish everyone a good day. Thank you all for joining. Bye.